I started walking a path of spirituality for the same reason that I think that many people do, which is that I was seeking healing. I basically had a life that sucked. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. I had been put on medication by my counselor for my anxiety and depression. Those left me really numb to everything. I wasn't experiencing, the intensity of my anxiety and depression, but I also was very numb, and I would usually use substances to try to feel something. My relationships were very superficial. I didn't feel like I had any purpose in life. So when I first started walking my path of spirituality, I was seeking healing. That was my goal. So I chased things like shadow work, endless kind of purge cycles, plant medicine, anything that I thought would lead to my healing. And what would happen is I would start to kind of get my head above water, and then all of a sudden things would come crashing down again. And I'd find a deeper level of trauma, another unintegrated shadow. But I felt like I was doing something noble, and I felt like I was making progress, even though life never seemed to sustain being better. So looking back, I can kind of see how I was caught on this hamster wheel of healing, perpetual healing. And I see the deceit that kept me there because I believed the lie that healing was my ultimate destination. That's why I started my path of spirituality in the first place. Started with meditation and mindfulness, and then started going into the path of New Age. So this got me thinking recently as a follower of Christ about how if we are constantly seeking healing, when do we ever come out of the desert and into the promised land? Because God didn't deliver the Israelites out of Egypt just to leave them wandering in the desert forever. He brought them out to bring them into dominion and authority in the promised land. His goal wasn't just to free them from slavery, but to also deliver them into dominion. And so this truth landed for me recently, which is that perpetual healing in the spirituality community can really keep people stuck, even Christians, because you feel enlightened and amazing after you unearth these new depths of self. Like you finally get why certain things in life have been so challenging or happened a certain way. But when you're out in the world, that's when you realize, wow, I'm still really triggered by certain people, certain situations, by certain politics, whatever that looks like. And this makes sense because we live in a fallen world, and this fallen world is very short on displaying God's grace. So a lot of times we don't experience God's grace when we're out in the world. But what I didn't see back then is that this sense of security and safety is never going to come from avoiding triggers or creating environments that didn't challenge me. Safety was going to come from no longer being triggered by these situations because my foundation was built on the rock. And that's the kind of peace, that's his peace that surpasses all understanding, that's talked about in Philippians 4:7. It isn't the absence of struggle, it's the presence of God in the midst of that struggle. And Jesus said that peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you, in John 14:27. So we know from scripture that worldly peace is the avoidance of problems. It's just blocking, cutting things out, removing them. But his peace actually overcomes the world. So let's talk about what's the difference between deliverance and healing versus actually stepping into our dominion, our authority. So yes, deliverance is God's will. He wants us to be healed, but that's not the end game. God didn't create us simply to be healed. He created us to walk in his authority, to be a reflection of his image on earth, like it says in Genesis 1:26-28. So deliverance, yes, is going to get us out of slavery. It's going to get us out of Egypt. But it's dominion that actually takes us into the promised land. And too many people live their lives in the desert, constantly seeking deliverance after deliverance, chasing another emotional breakthrough after another emotional breakthrough. But the desert was never the destination. The wilderness is a transitional place and space, just like it was for the Israelites, where you learn to trust, you learn how to have obedience, and you learn how to fight spiritual warfare. You develop the spiritual maturity to fight the war that we're in. And God is saying to you that you have been where you are long enough. The reason so many of us are stuck is because spiritual warfare is very real, and we are not equipping ourselves to have authority in that war, even though God has given us everything that we need. So we don't know how to battle the real enemy. Even though we're in this war, we forget that we're not fighting against the flesh and the blood, each other, but we are fighting against the spiritual forces of evil that are talked about in Ephesians 6. And this isn't to glorify the devil and say that like he's the cause of all of these things, but it is to recognize that his tactics are very subtle and that he uses us by twisting God's truth, which develops fear in us, and it keeps us in this self-focused cycle of despair and healing, despair and healing. And even pastors and leaders and teachers who are in the word can fall prey to this if they're not truly equipped. When we see spiritual leaders succumb to sin and do things, like the example of like the pastor who gets arrested for soliciting an underage girl, even though he was running a mega church. This isn't just a moral failing. This is evidence that the spiritual battle is being lost because they weren't armed for war. They didn't have on the full armor of God, which says, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. That's what Ephesians 6:11 says. So what is empowering about this, what is encouraging about this, and what I want you to take away from this is that whatever God has not removed from your life yet, he has given you the power to resist, renounce, and overcome. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart because I have overcome the world. That's what he said in John 16:33. So through him, you're not just a survivor. You are more than a conqueror. Like you have already won. We have to start fighting from a position of we have already won instead of fighting to try to win, because we know we have won. Romans 8:37 tells us so. So this isn't about striving in your own strength, but instead standing firm in his power. You were designed for dominion, not endless desert wandering and perpetual healing. I am inviting you tonight to come into the Bold Belief Bible Study group because we're going to be diving into some of these lies, particularly in the realm of the prosperity gospel. And that's a message that really coddles people into a false sense of safety and security through worldly things, keeping them dependent on external circumstances rather than Christ. But true freedom isn't about avoiding these challenges or finding safe spaces. It's about walking in the authority and the identity that God gave you. So if that sounds like something that you are ready to really anchor in, come and join us. And we're going to be talking about things like breaking free from the endless healing cycle. We're going to talk about equipping yourself for spiritual warfare. We're going to be talking about stepping into the dominion and the authority that God has called you to. And we're going to be talking about the lies of the prosperity gospel versus the truth of the good news. Because deliverance is part of God's will, but dominion is his design for you. You can do that by going to boldbeliefsociety.com. It's tonight at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. On boldbeliefsociety.com, there's a form that you fill out to join the free community, and you will get the link to come and join us live, and you'll also get the replay link. So if you can't make it live tonight, but you still want to catch that stream, then you can absolutely do so. I'm sending you a lot of love, and I'll see you there.